We're starting a new book that I'm going to be preaching through. It's going to take us a while. I've kind of laid it out. It's going to take us to the end of the year, but we're going to start today working our way through the book of Hebrews. I don't know if you've ever looked at this book before, but I think in terms of books that I've preached through, preaching through this book has probably affected my understanding of the overall Bible more than any other thing I've preached through. So hopefully it'll be beneficial to us. So we're gonna just get started today, and I wanted to start out showing you an image here. Does anybody know what this is? Anybody owned one of these? Well, my dad did. I couldn't have afforded it back then, but I think that's a Magnavox. I don't know that ours was quite exactly like that, but it was very similar. It was actually one of these really nice piece of furniture TV sets that had the turntable in it, and boy, it was an amazing piece of technology, right? We had it there, and you could watch the news there and find out all about the world, and you could, kick it back and play some tunes, put on some, oh, good grief, what records did Dad have, Reuben? Johnny Cash, yeah, we had some stuff, pop a record in there and listen to it. Now, it was great. We really enjoyed it, but it wasn't really the best ever, obviously. Ellie recently had a birthday, and I'm a really good husband. I got her something that looks kind of like this. Now, here's the thing. Once you've seen this, that old one is just not as great. Yeah, it played music, but man, it didn't sound like the sound bar here sounds. It didn't have near the clarity of sound. It wasn't stereo. And yeah, the screen was pretty big, but this thing's a considerable bit bigger than that screen. And it didn't have color. I remember as a child watching one of those Sinbad movies, and they were looking for the blue rose. And eventually they found it. And it was gray, because that's all we had, So I had to imagine everything, and one of those good Harryhausen animation type movies. And it was okay, but man, I sure would have loved to see that in full color. This is of a whole other order. The technology is a different type of technology, and everything is just superior in every possible way. That's kind of what the whole book of Hebrews is about. And the author of Hebrews, we're going to spend a year looking at this together. And he takes Jesus and says, let's compare Jesus to this. Let's compare him to that. Let's compare him to this other thing. And the conclusion every time is going to be, Jesus is better. So that's what we're going to be focusing on this year, the idea that Jesus is better. Better than anything you've encountered, better than anything you could encounter, better than anything that has come up to us in the past, better than anything we're going to run across in the future. We're going to just look at the first 4 verses today. And I've titled our message, God's Supreme Messenger. So please open your Bibles to the book of Hebrews. We're going to look at chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. And I've done something this week because it was a short passage and I was able to do it. I went ahead and translated it myself. So I'm going to use my translation. Don't expect that the rest of the year. Some of the passages are really long, and translating takes a lot of time, and I don't always have a lot of time. But so today, don't drive yourself crazy trying to figure out what translation I'm using. I'm using my own. And because verses 1 through 4 are actually one sentence in the Hebrew, I'm going to read through the whole thing once, and then we'll start going back and looking at it by pieces, okay? So if you'll follow along, let's hear it once through. At many times and in many ways, God was speaking long ago to our ancestors through the prophets. during these last days, he has spoken to us through the Son, whom he appointed heir of everything, through whom he fashioned the ages, who, being the radiance of glory and the express image of his real being, and upholding all things by his powerful word, having accomplished the cleansing of sins, sat at the right hand of majesty on high, becoming as much better than the angels, as is to them the name he has inherited. That's a complicated sentence. And I've often heard, when you study Greek, they tell you Hebrews has some of the most fancy Greek in the New Testament. I agree. But I wanted to put it all together because I think for clarity's sake, our modern translations want to break it apart into separate sentences, but you lose kind of the flow of how the thought all hangs together in that one sentence. So that's why I did that. Okay, so let's go back and look at this. And what I'm suggesting here is that these first 4 verses are basically the thesis statement for Hebrews. Now, Hebrews is a funny little book. Because we have it there listed in our Bibles as one of the epistles, right? One of the general epistles. And it's there in the Bible in that section of letters. And there are things about Hebrews that read like a letter. When you get to the end of it, he starts making personal comments about people they know and sending greetings and saying stuff like this. So it finishes like a letter. But if you've read any of Paul's letters, or any of the other letters in the New Testament, you probably recognize that it doesn't start like a letter. We start letters with dear whatever, right? In antiquity, you started letters with saying who was writing the letter. Paul, apostle of Jesus Christ, that kind of thing. And then you would identify who the letter was going to the saints that are in Corinth, or something like that, And then you would get on into your letter. Well, there's nothing like that at the beginning of this. It just launches straight into, this is what we're going to talk about. So in some ways, it kind of breaks the rules. It's kind of its own genre, so to speak. It's more like a theological argument, but it's concluded like a letter. So we're going to work our way through it in this coming year, piece by piece. So we start out with a statement about what has come before, what has led up to the day in which the author of Hebrews writes. And you'll hear me throughout the year refer to the one who wrote this book as the author of Hebrews, because I don't think anybody knows who wrote Hebrews. The author never identifies himself. And all we have are traditions of people saying, well, I think this person wrote it or that person wrote it. But really, and the suggestions are many. Some say Paul, although my Greek professor said if Paul wrote it, he had a brain transplant. Some would say Paul, some would say Barnabas, some would say Luke, some would even say maybe it was a woman, maybe it was Priscilla of Priscilla and Aquila, or maybe it was even Mary, the mother of Jesus, or Philip the evangelist. There are so many suggestions, and there's really no way to arbitrate between one or the other. You can find evidence that says, well, Apollos supposedly argued powerfully that Jesus was the Messiah, maybe, and that's kind of the point of the letter. Maybe Apollos wrote it, but there's really nothing solid enough for us to have any degree of certainty. So we're just going to assume that God knew who was going to write it, and we didn't need to know for sure. We know he's part of the apostolic circle. This is written during the time when the rest of the New Testament is being written, and in the conclusion, he talks about how Timothy has recently been released from prison, so he's connected to the same people that the other letter writers were, and that's all we know. We don't know for sure who wrote it. Okay, so he begins by saying, at many times, and in many ways, God was speaking long ago to our ancestors through the prophets. Your translation probably says God spoke, but it's a participle in the Greek. And it's the idea of an ongoing activity. It's not just that God spoke here, and here, but it's just this continuous action of speaking. And some Bibles may translate that not at many times, but in many parts. That could also be translated that way. So it could be referring in segments of revelation. God has been giving us pieces and bits of it. But it's also the idea that this has been an ongoing process throughout human history. From the very beginning, God has been communicating with us. The author of Hebrews is letting us know up front that God has been talking to us from the very beginning. God has not been silent. He has been explicitly and deliberately intervening in our lives and communicating with us through all of our history as humankind. He says he did it at many times or in many parts and in many ways, the variety of ways in which God has communicated. And God has been speaking long ago to our ancestors or our fathers through the prophets. A prophet is a messenger of God, somebody who communicates something from God. Don't assume that a prophet is a foreteller of the future. That may or may not be the case. It depends on the message God has to share. But a prophet is basically one who communicates a message from God. And think about it. Look back at the history of Israel and think, how many different times in their history and in how many different ways did God communicate through people? I think back to people like Abraham, who didn't write anything and who didn't preach any sermons, but was a man of amazing faith and who left behind for us a legacy in a life lived of what it means to trust in God and to walk this life with God and to be willing to lay everything on the line as we walk with God. Abraham was one of God's messengers. You have people like Moses who communicated a huge amount of information through whom God communicated all the law of Israel and gave us all this instruction and wrote down for Israel its prehistory. You have people that God used to communicate who didn't write, people who were just historical figures. You have people like David, the great king, and the passionate worship leader and the writer of songs. You have people who were wise and left behind for us proverbs like Solomon. And you have people who were great prophets but didn't write down any sermons for us like Elijah and Elisha, and who left behind through the narrative of their lives powerful illustrations of walking with God in this life. And of course, you have the 16 writing prophets through whom God left sermons that took all the previous revelation and said, guys, this is what it means. This is what it means to be faithful to God in your context right now. And the prophets applied what had come before in their sermons, their oracles, their messages to Israel and to the nations. And you have so many different ways, such variety of ways, and through all of the history, God has been talking and talking and talking and communicating with us because God is very interested in us knowing Him. And He's very committed to drawing us back to Him. So the author of Hebrews begins with this. This is what we've known to this point. God has, throughout our history, been talking to us. He's done it in many moments, in many parts. Many bits of it have come through prophets. And in many ways, the voices have been very different one from another. And there's been a tremendous variety in the ways in which God has communicated. During these last days, already the author of Hebrews is telling us a very important thing about history. You see, throughout all these prophets that came before, there was a lot of talk about the last days. There was a final age of human history that would be ushered in by some kind of a king God was going to establish. And this king would establish the kingdom of God, and this kingdom would eclipse all other kingdoms and be, at one point, the only thing that remained. This kingdom would eradicate sin and every evil thing from creation. So the prophets talked about this, and the author of Hebrews, already at the opening of his letter, is telling us we have arrived at that final age of human history. We are in the last days. There was all that went before, and then there's the concluding chapter of human history. And the author of Hebrews is saying, now in these last days, He has spoken to us through the Son. I supplied the article there because it's a little awkward, but really there's no article there in the Hebrew. What he says is God communicated through prophets, and now he communicates through Son. And the emphasis there is not, although as we work our way through the letter, it's clear that when we're talking about Jesus as the Son of God, we're talking about the unique Son of God, one of the three persons of the one God Trinity, God, the God, not some lesser version, not one among many sons of God, the Son of God. But in this sentence, his point is not that, the uniqueness of the Son. His point is there's been one way in which God has been communicating, and now there has been a completely new category of communication. Through prophets, through Son. This is the way God has chosen to speak to us now that we have arrived at the final age of human history. This momentous moment, this time in which everything God's been promising comes to a head. Everything he's said he was going to do. The commitment he entered into when he established the rainbow as a covenant and said, I will redeem creation. I will not destroy it. I will rescue it. It comes to fruition now, the author of Hebrews is saying. And this communication is of a completely different category, a different order from every other communication that has come before. Now God speaks through Son. Now the Godhead itself has taken on human form and come to dwell among us. This is a completely new way of hearing from God. Nothing else is even in the same category. So don't ever fall into the mistake. The author of Hebrews is trying to lay this out from the very beginning. Don't ever try to lump Jesus in with all the other prophets. Don't make him one more of those voices. This is a whole different category of communication. And it comes at the culmination of human history. It comes when the ages have reached their climax. This is, believe it or not, the final age of human history. God has accomplished what he promised to accomplish, and all that remains is closing the curtain. God doesn't have to accomplish anything else. Redemption is done. Christ reigns on high already. It is accomplished. There's a period of waiting for more people to get in. That's all. This is the age we are in now. The age that the first Christians were in. The final age of human history. And it's appropriate that in this final age of human history, God speaks in a unique, new way through the incarnation. So now he's going to spend some space here describing this Son, this new form of communication. So it's going to take verses 2b through the end. So basically from here on out in what we're looking at today. What can he tell us about this Son, this new form of communication from God? He says, whom he appointed heir of everything. The author of Hebrews is saying that Jesus, the Son, has been appointed by God the Father as the rightful inheritor of everything. That's a good way to word it so that you don't accidentally think that there's something left out. If something is, it is part of Jesus' inheritance. If it exists, it's his. So inheritance is something that speaks to the end of something, right? When you receive inheritance when your dad dies, right? You receive inheritance at the conclusion of a life or at the conclusion of something. And here we're not talking about the death of the father being the moment at which the son inherits, but I would say we're talking about the end of this order of creation. When this final age closes and there is a new heaven and new earth, when everything is made new, when the curtain is closed for the final time on this order of creation, everything is given to the Son as his inheritance. So we have Jesus standing at the far end as the recipient of creation once it comes to its close and its culmination. Jesus is the rightful inheritor of creation. He's at the end. To put this in the terms that John would use in Revelation, he's the Omega. He's the Z in your alphabet. He's at the close of things. And then he says, through whom he fashioned the ages. Your translation might say the world, but it's really the plural there, ages, eons. And this is the idea, not just that through the Son, through Jesus, and there are many other parts of the New Testament that tell us this exact same thing. It was through Jesus that creation happened. But not only just thinking back to the idea of this initial, let's create everything in 6 days, Genesis 1 type idea, and then finish it and be done with it. But this idea of the ages of history, the ages of creation's existence. Through every age, the Son has been the means by which the Godhead has created, fashioned, made every age. This last age is fashioned by Jesus. Every age of existence. So Christ is not only the instrument in creation in the three-dimensional space we're thinking of, height and width and depth and all these things. He's also the fashioner of the time aspect of creation. Every age of existence he fashions. Now this is the thing this is the point at which I differ with atheistic evolution. Atheistic evolution suggests that the things that have happened through the ages are mere happenstance, that we observe changes and that they are just random things that happened for no reason. I agree that things have changed through the ages and that there's been a process, an observable process of transformation in things, and we can record and look at these things. I have no problem with that. It's when you say that this just happened by itself that I have a problem. The author of Hebrews says, Jesus is the means by which the Godhead fashioned every age of creation's history. So the creation is not a one-time event way back in the distant past. The creation is an ongoing process. Ever since the Big Bang, things have been changing, haven't they? Isn't that what scientists tell us? I think the author of Hebrews would agree. Every age has been fashioned by the hand of the Son. So not only is he at the end as the inheritor of creation once it reaches fruition, but he is the one who has started it and sustained it all the way through. What else can he say about the Son? Who, being the radiance of glory and the express image of his real being. So the Son is the radiance of glory, and in the context of what he's talking about, I think he's talking about glory as this attribute of God, the very radiance of God's glory, and the express image of his real being, his very essence. If you're going to try to figure out what exactly is God, the Son is it. So this isn't just some prophet. This isn't just some guy like you and me. This is God Almighty, stepped into flesh and blood to walk this earth among us. The very radiance of glory, the express image of God's real being. And upholding all things by his powerful word. And this goes with the idea of fashioning, making the ages. Everything that is has not only been wound up and set in motion by the Son, but it is sustained and upheld through every moment of history by the Son. It is Jesus, it's because of Jesus that the sun rises every morning. It's because of Jesus that electrons and neutrons and protons continue to stick together the way they're supposed to in atoms. It's because of Jesus that gravity exists, and that things that really brilliant people theorize can finally at some point be proven. Like there's something Einstein talked about that I don't understand, that apparently they think has been proven this past week or two. Something about time, space, and gravity and waves and something. But it's because Jesus is so consistent in upholding everything that we can even talk about things like science. What does this tell us about the Son then? If God is speaking to us through the Son, it's like comparing that to the prophets is like those two TVs I showed you at the beginning. You know, one is great if that's all you've got. But the minute you see the real deal, the thing that shows it in such clarity that you can see every single detail, that everything you need to know is in perfect detail in front of you, you have come across what you needed. Not an approximation of it, not a shadow of it, not an illustration of it, but the very real thing itself. Now, if what we wanted from these communications from God was to come face to face with God and actually know Him, the Son has accomplished that. We get to see God, not some mediator, not some intermediary, but God Himself. We get to know Him face to face in the Son. He concludes his sentence here, having accomplished the cleansing of sins. So he tells us this is what the Son has done. Not only is he, in terms of credentials, all these amazing things, but he came and accomplished the thing that no prophet could. The cleansing of sins. You see, without that, there was no fixing anything. Without the cleansing of sins, there is no redemption for humankind, and there is no rescue or remaking of creation. Paul tells us that all creation has been subject to bondage because of us. And until we are not rescued, creation is not rescued. Until our redemption is not accomplished, the redemption of all creation is not accomplished. And creation groans, awaiting the day of our glory. So the Son came and accomplished redemption. He cleansed sins. This is what He did when He died on the cross. And the book of Hebrews is going to flesh this out in much more detail. But He accomplished the cleansing of sins and then sat at the right hand of majesty on high. Here we have an allusion to Daniel 7, this image where the Ancient of Days gives the kingdom to the Son of Man who comes on the clouds of heaven. You see, when He rose and spent some days with the disciples after He rose and finally gave them the Great Commission and ascended to heaven in front of their very eyes, the disciples bore witness to the fact that Christ is now at the right hand of the Father, just as promised in the prophets. His victory is accomplished, and He shares the throne of God Himself. The Godhead reigns supreme over creation, having redeemed it and rescued it. Christ now sits at the right hand of majesty on high, becoming as much better than the angels as is to them the name He has inherited. And really that final part of the sentence is a segue to our next message, where we're going to compare Jesus to angels. And some people make a big deal out of angels. And the author of Hebrews is going to say why Jesus is a whole lot better than angels. But we conclude this opening thought with this idea of a Redeemer who has accomplished the cleansing of sins and who now reigns supreme. Jesus told the disciples, even before He ascended, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, period. He already rules supreme over everything. The author of Hebrews is echoing the same sentiment, the same idea here. He now sits on high and is absolute conquering ruler of all that exists. I guess the question that remains then is, what does this mean to you? What are the voices you listen to? And don't get me wrong, the prophets are great. I love reading about them. I love reading their stories. I love reading their messages. And God speaks to me through them, and they're profound and moving. But you know what? Unless Jesus had come and dealt with my sin, all those messages would do me no good. And it's only because I am able to know God personally through the Son that these messages come alive to me now. That they make sense. I see who they're talking about. This is an invitation for you to discover that Jesus is better. That He is the supreme message from God. If you want to hear from God, there is nothing that can deal with the real issues you need dealt with other than Jesus. There's no prophet, there's no revelation, there's no message, there's no book, there's no expert, there's nothing that can cover for you what Jesus the Son has accomplished. He's it. He's not one option among many. He's not one of many paths that all lead to the same place. He is the one unique, culminating communication from God. And the amazing thing about it is that He came and made Himself available to us. And you know the final instruction He gave His disciples before He ascended to the Father? Tell everybody about this. His intent is not to hold this back from anyone. His intent is to make Himself available to everyone. So Christianity is not an arrogant faith. We're not about saying that we're better than anyone or that our message is somehow special because we have it. God fixed what was broken and tasked those who received that blessing with the responsibility of sharing it with the world. And we are invited to share with others the fact that Jesus is better. I want to ask you today, as we sing our song of invitation, I'd like to ask the musicians to come forward. To consider for a moment, what is it that I'm relying on for my life? What is it? Is there some expert, some book, some thing that I really respect, some friend, some family? Is there something that I'm relying on? Or am I relying on Jesus? Is the Son the thing that I have latched my life and heart onto? If not, I want to warn you. What you need fixed, what you need dealt with, only the Son can deal with. So I want to invite you today to, if you haven't done this, to give your life over to Him, to trust yourself to Him, to allow the Son to open up to you who God is, and to allow the Son to speak to you who God is in a way nothing else, no one else, no other form of communication can accomplish. If that's you this morning, I want to ask you to come forward and give your life to Him. Maybe you already know Jesus, but you've drifted in your attention. You've focused on other things. You've been looking to other avenues, and you've forgotten that this is the center of your being, that Jesus is what your life is all about, and that Jesus is the answer to every question you have, and He is the purpose for your living. And you need to come today and recommit yourself to Him. If that's where you are today, I ask you to come forward while we sing. Let's all stand. David and Kim, could you help me with the invitation? And Charlie and Becky, could you help me? Please come while we sing. These who are up the front here just want to take your hand, pray with you, and encourage you during this time of response.